For 87 years, humanity had a seat at the galactic table. The problem? It was next to the boiler room, right by the service entrance. That was us. And that was Ambassador Elena Vasquez. She was about to teach the whole galaxy why you never, ever underestimate the little guy. Stick around, because you're not going to believe what happens when they finally push her too far. From their gilded thrones high above, the Lorathi looked down on everyone, their silver skin gleaming with arrogance. Below them, the Keth floated in their personal water tanks, followed by a dozen other species, all ranked miles ahead of humanity. Elena didn't care about the cheap seats, she cared about the disrespect. The council recognizes the delegate from Earth, a Lorathi official droned, his voice so bored he might as well have been ordering office supplies. You may speak. Elena didn't flinch. She hit a button, and the air filled with images of horror, skyscrapers collapsing into fire, parents running with children in their arms, and streets littered with the fallen. Over the last 4 months, she said, her voice like steel, Vorkath pirates have wiped 3 human colonies off the map. Nexus Prime, Haven's Rest, New Bangalore, she said their names like a eulogy. That's a total of 12 million souls. We have confirmed 47,000 dead so far, and the count is climbing every hour. The words hung in the vast hall. A few delegates looked uncomfortable, but most just looked impatient. Each time, she pressed on, we sent a distress call to the Council's defense fleet, and each time they arrived between 6 and 9 days too late. By then, the pirates were long gone, along with our people and everything we owned. The minister replied without a hint of emotion. The fleet has many duties. Response times are based on strategic importance. Strategic importance, Elena repeated, letting the words poison the air. That's odd, because when your mining station had a pirate problem last year, the fleet got there in 14 hours. When a Keth freighter was attacked, they made it in 11. But when human worlds are burning, our importance suddenly drops to 0. A ripple of whispers went through the room. You just didn't speak to the Lorathi like that, especially not if you were from a species they considered insignificant. But Elena was done being polite. We want an explanation, she demanded, and we are formally requesting that defense ships be sent to our 4th colony, Esperanza. Our intelligence says the raiders are headed there next. The minister, a smug creature named Selton, actually leaned back and smirked, like a parent about to explain gravity to a toddler. Ambassador, these raiders are a fact of life in the outer systems. All species must be self-sufficient. The Council provides support, but we can't fight every battle for you. Perhaps if humanity spent more on its own military instead of asking for handouts. A cold fire ignited in Elena's gut. We have paid our council taxes in full for 87 years, she shot back. We've sent our soldiers to die keeping your peace. Our engineers built the communication system you're using right now. Our doctors have served on your medical ships, saving lives all across this galaxy. We have done everything this council has ever asked. And you were rewarded with a seat at the table, Selton said, his voice practically dripping with disdain. That does not entitle you to the galaxy's entire fleet as your personal bodyguards. Sometimes, a young species must suffer. It builds character. A few of the other ambassadors actually chuckled. The Droxy delegates started making a series of clicks, their version of laughter. They found this amusing. Elena waited for them to finish. Esperanza is home to 2 million people. They have children. The pirates will be there in 15 days. We are begging you. Your request will be considered, Selton said with a dismissive wave. A committee will be formed to assess the threat. You should have a formal decision within 60 cycles. 60 cycles. Almost 70 days. Esperanza would be a graveyard by then. Elena looked across the hall at the faces of species that humans had fought beside, healed, and died for. She thought of the human engineers who fixed their broken stations, and the human marines who fell protecting their worlds. It was all for nothing. It never mattered. I see, Elena said, her voice now dangerously quiet. With a slow, deliberate movement, she reached for the council emblem on her jacket, a metal pin that was supposed to represent galactic unity, a family. She unclipped it and gently placed it on the podium in front of her. "What is the meaning of this?" Selton demanded, his smug expression finally cracking with a hint of confusion. "I'm doing what my people should have done a long time ago," Elalina replied, standing taller than ever. "On behalf of the United Earth government and every human being alive, I am formally announcing our immediate and total withdrawal from the Galactic Council." The chamber fell completely silent. And then came the laughter, louder this time, full of ridicule. "Withdrawal?" the Draxi ambassador clicked. "And go where? Do what? You're a tiny species on the edge of nowhere. You won't survive without us." "We'll manage," Elalina said calmly. "You'll come crawling back in under a year, begging us to let you in," Selton sneered. "And maybe we'll think about it after you've learned some respect." Elalina just picked up her datapad and started to walk away. But at the edge of the stage, she stopped and glanced back at the laughing crowd. They were already turning away from her, dismissing her as a minor inconvenience that had been handled. "You will all remember this day," she said. She didn't shout, but her voice cut through the noise like a knife, and a few of them turned back to her. "I just hope you don't remember it with regret." "Is that a threat?" Selton scoffed. "From a species that can't even defend itself?" "No, not a threat," Elalina said, her eyes sweeping across their arrogant faces. "It's a fact. You never cared enough to see who we really are. You never understood what we were capable of. Maybe that's our fault. We assumed you wanted friends, not just servants." She turned her back on them for the last time and walked out. As the giant doors slid open, she added one last thing over her shoulder. "Goodbye, Minister. Goodbye, everyone. I sincerely hope you never need the help you just denied us." The doors hissed shut behind her. Inside, the council got back to business, having already forgotten about the little species that just threw a fit. Their leaving meant nothing. It wouldn't change a thing. At least, that's what they thought. As Elalina walked through the station's main hall, she felt the eyes on her, some filled with pity, most with scorn. When she got back to the human embassy, her staff was already packing. They knew this was a possibility. "Is it done?" her top aide, David, asked her. "It's done." And their reaction? A small, bitter smile touched Elalina's lips. They laughed. David nodded slowly. "They won't be laughing for long." "No," Elalina agreed, looking out the window at the incredible galactic station that humanity had poured its blood and sweat into building. "They won't." Not a single one of them had a clue what was coming. They had no idea how many of their essential systems were run by human engineers, how many of their trade routes were protected by human intelligence analysts, how many of their greatest enemies were kept at bay by human technology. They were about to get a rude awakening. The galaxy was about to find out that humanity was through being its doormat. Elalina opened a secure channel to Earth Command. "This is Ambassador Vasquez, authorization Omega-7. The Council said no. Now, it's our turn to answer. Execute Protocol Sunrise." The reply came back instantly. "Protocol Sunrise is a go. Welcome home, Ambassador. Let's get started." Elalina cut the connection. The galaxy kept spinning, completely unaware that its future had just been fundamentally altered. The arrogant delegates in that chamber didn't know it yet, but their era of easy living was over. It all started when one woman took off a pin, and it was going to end in a very, very long silence. For the first 3 months, nothing happened. The council congratulated itself on getting rid of the annoying humans. Then, the cracks started to show, not all at once, but slowly, like a disease. The galactic communication network, which had been secretly maintained and updated by human programmers for decades, started to fail. Supply ships started disappearing. A critical vaccine headed for a Keth planet never arrived, and the Vorkath pirates, who used to only be bold enough to hit human colonies, suddenly sacked a Larathi luxury liner. The galaxy was learning a hard lesson. The quiet, helpful species they treated like the hired help was actually the one who'd built the entire house, and they had just walked out with the blueprints. What do you think happens when the most vital, yet most ignored workers in the entire galaxy all decide to quit on the exact same day? You're about to see, and trust me, it's a galactic-sized train wreck. So you're going to want to stick around to watch how this whole thing completely unravels. It all began with a number that simply didn't compute. Governor Keith Marr was staring at the food import data for the month, and his mind just refused to accept it. Their shipments were down by 30%. He instantly hailed his chief of logistics. "This is a mistake," he barked. "Check the figures again." The chief did just that, his face looking ghostly white on the screen. The numbers were solid. "How is this even possible?" Keith Marr shouted. "Our agricultural worlds are exceeding their quotas." The chief took a nervous gulp. "It's not an issue with production, Governor. It's an issue with delivery. As it turns out, 40% of our food was transported along routes managed by, well, by humans. They handled the dangerous jobs our own fleets refused to take. Their rates were cheaper, and they were never, not once, late." "Then just hire a different crew," Keith Marr commanded. "We're trying, sir. The Draxi are demanding triple our usual rate. The Vaughn refused to fly through the Nebula corridor, and the Mathari freighters are just too sluggish. We already have food riots kicking off on 7 of the outer planets." Keith Marr could only glare at the screen. 40%. A 40% gap in their supply chain, and somehow no one had even noticed until it was already a crisis. "Fix it," he snarled. The situation was an absolute catastrophe. The minister practically fled the room, but he had no answers. No one did. The humans had spent 80 years meticulously building those trade lines from nothing. You don't just find a replacement for that overnight. And on the far side of the galaxy, the Kathvari were dealing with their own private nightmare. Their legendary communications network, the absolute pride of the Council, was beginning to crumble. And this wasn't just any old network. It was the system that linked every major species across 1,000 light-years, transforming messages that once took months into real-time conversations. It was the literal backbone of their entire civilization. And almost nobody knew that humans had quietly been the ones to design and construct every single relay station. Technician Val floated inside his aquatic sphere, watching a tidal wave of error messages he couldn't possibly decipher. 3 primary relays had gone offline in a single week. The backup systems were screaming bloody murder. If just one more station failed, entire sectors of the galaxy would be plunged into total silence. "Can you restore them?" Director Malith asked, her tentacles twisting into anxious knots. "We can try," Val gurgled, "but those quantum alignment systems, that's all human technology. We have the starter manuals, but for a system-wide collapse of this magnitude..." His voice faded, letting the terrifying silence say the rest. "We never took the time to understand how it actually worked," Melith finished for him, the awful reality crashing down on her. "No," Val said softly. "We never imagined we would have to." This exact same story was happening all across Council territory. The humans had been everywhere, doing a little of this and a little of that, and nobody had ever given them a second thought. They were like the cosmic background radiation, absolutely essential but totally invisible, until they weren't. And out on the border worlds, the Vorkath pirates were starting to take notice. Captain Thazin of the Council Defense Fleet received a desperate distress signal from a distant outpost. A pirate raiding crew had attacked a civilian transport with 40 passengers on board, most of them Draxi families. "Get us to Cur 5 immediately," she commanded. But even at maximum warp, her vessel was days away. And in the blackness of deep space, everyone knew that 3 days was a lifetime. "Captain," her communications officer spoke up, his voice hushed. Back when the humans were with the Council, their patrol cutters covered this entire sector. They could have been on the scene in 4 to 6 hours. "I am well aware of that," Thazin replied, her tone as cold as space. "Should we perhaps try sending them a message?" Thazin just shook her head, her expression a perfect mask of stubborn pride. "Humanity left the Council. They are not taking our calls." The officer paused. "But the people on that ship..." "I know," she shot back, her frustration finally boiling over. "I know." They arrived at Cur 5 3 days later. The transport was a ghost ship floating in the void, its hull torn wide open. There were no survivors. It was the third attack of this kind in just a month. Before the humans had departed, a raid this brazen would have been unimaginable. It was as if the pirates had always been afraid of something lurking out there in the dark. Now that fear was gone. No one was saying it out loud, but the thought was in everyone's mind. Back at the Grand Assembly, the council convened to bicker about the escalating chaos. Minister Celine tried to put a positive spin on things. "These are simply growing pains," he declared with a flourish. "We grew far too dependent on human labor. This is our chance to achieve self-sufficiency. It will ultimately make us stronger." "Stronger?" Ambassador Thexelar of the Kathvari rose from his sphere. "My people's communication grid is teetering on the brink of total failure. We've already lost contact with 3 of our colonies. How much longer until that's repaired?" Selin had no response. "The humans are the only ones who truly understand that system," Thexelar insisted. "Then you should learn it," Selin retorted. "It took the humans 80 years to construct that network. We do not have 80 years. "Well," Selin said with a casual wave of his hand, "maybe you should have learned from them instead of just accepting their handouts. The humans are gone. We'll get over it." "Will we?" the Draxi ambassador interjected, his mandibles clicking with anxiety. "My latest reports indicate that profits are plummeting across every single sector. The human freighters weren't just affordable, they were reliable. They flew the treacherous routes that everyone else was too terrified to even attempt. They solved problems for us before we were even aware they existed," he went on. "That is enough!" Celine's scales flushed a deep, angry crimson. "I will not stand here and listen to this whining over a species that abandoned us. They made the choice to leave. Let them face the consequences. We are the Council. We governed this galaxy for 10,000 years before humans even managed to get to their own moon. We will govern it for 10,000 more." The session concluded just like all the others, with a great deal of yelling and absolutely zero solutions. But in the weeks that followed, a handful of quiet analysts in government back rooms began to sift through old archives, trying to piece together what exactly humanity had been up to all that time. What they discovered was absolutely stunning. The Larathi Intelligence Agency learned that human observer vessels had secretly formed the backbone of the early warning system that protected the core worlds. For decades, humanity had taken on the jobs no one else wanted: dull, solitary patrols in the vast, empty spaces between the stars. The other species had assumed they were just ambitious newcomers trying to prove their worth. The truth was infinitely bigger. On those lonely patrols, human ships had covertly intercepted and turned away 7 separate invasion fleets from beyond the galactic rim. They accomplished this with clever diplomacy, secret back-channel negotiations, and quiet threats the Council was never even told about. They never filed a report. They never asked for a pat on the back. "But why?" the intelligence director stammered, staring at the newly declassified documents. Why would they keep something of this magnitude a secret? His chief analyst couldn't answer. No one could. On a dozen different planets, the same staggering realization was dawning. The humans hadn't just been lending a hand. They were the invisible framework holding the entire galaxy together. Human engineers were the ones secretly patching their crumbling power grids. Human doctors were the ones operating clinics on fringe planets their own governments had long forgotten. Human teachers were running schools for children of every species. None of it was ever part of a formal treaty. The humans simply saw a job that needed doing, and they did it. The only thing they ever wanted in return was to be treated as equals. And for all that sacrifice, the Council had given them the worst seats in the Assembly and ignored their input at every opportunity. 3 months after humanity's departure, Ambassador Thexelar convened an emergency session. "We must ask them to return," he stated plainly. Celine actually laughed out loud. "Return? After they deserted us? We should be sanctioning them, not begging them." "They did not desert us," Thexelar countered. "Their ambassador's final words were that we would remember this day." Was that a threat? Or was it a warning from someone who could see the cliff we were all marching towards? Thexelar looked utterly spent. "Minister, I have dedicated the last month to studying our dependence on them. The simple truth is, if this continues, our entire galactic civilization could collapse within a single year. You're being dramatic. I wish I were, Thexelar said. Selene just waved his hand dismissively. The humans will come crawling back. They need us far more than we need them. They're a minor species with no real influence. Once they're done with their little temper tantrum, they'll be begging us to let them back in. And what if they don't? Thexelar asked softly. Then they will be a forgotten footnote in history. But even as Seelan spoke those words, something new was happening out in human territory. Fleets were on the move, brand new starbases were powering up, and messages were zipping along secret communication lines the Council never even knew existed. Humanity wasn't crawling back. They weren't fading away. They were building something better. And very soon, the rest of the galaxy was going to receive an invitation. Have you ever been completely betrayed by the very people you were trying to help? Deep inside a bunker buried in the Swiss Alps, that's exactly what the leaders of humanity were facing. Admiral Chen Wei laid out the devastating truth. Our entire navy is ready, he said, his voice strained. Every last ship, every crew, we can be gone on 72 hours' notice. President Okonjo just stared at the holographic map, her expression unreadable. And what about the Council? How long until their perfect little world falls apart without us? The Admiral answered immediately. Their economy collapses in 6 months. Their governments will be in chaos within a year, and that's assuming the Dreth don't make their move before then. Someone in the back asked, "The Dreth?" "Oh, they're watching," Chen confirmed. "They see the Council bleeding, and they're getting ready to pounce. They always knew who the real threat was, even if the Council was too arrogant to admit it. If you've ever wanted to see the quiet underdog finally stand up for themselves, you need to hear the rest of this story. With us out of the way, they see a golden opportunity," the Admiral went on. "The Council looks weaker by the day, and the predators are starting to circle." President Okonjo scanned the faces around the table, the exhausted, heartbroken leaders of the human race. For 87 long years, they had done everything right, trying to be good galactic citizens, all for the hope of being treated as equals. That hope was now completely gone. "We gave them everything," she whispered, her voice trembling with emotion. "We shared our technology, we fought their battles. All we ever wanted was a little respect." "I know," Admiral Chen said gently, "but that was the one thing they were never going to give." The president's eyes went cold, her voice turning to ice. "In that case, we have no other option. Proceed with the plan. It's time this galaxy learned a lesson about who we really are." Okonjo looked at the image of Earth, a shining blue jewel in the vast darkness. "We're still going to protect them," she said, a quiet determination in her voice, "because that's the right thing to do." With those words, the meeting ended. The preparations continued, but out in the silent emptiness of space, something was waking up, something that had been dormant for almost a century while humanity tried to play the role of the galaxy's helpful, harmless younger sibling. The galaxy was about to get a rude awakening. Just 8 months after humanity withdrew, the galaxy erupted in flames. It happened without any warning. 300 Vorkath warships ripped a hole in space-time directly above the colonies of Larathi Prime. They didn't make demands. They didn't try to negotiate. They just began to incinerate entire worlds. From his command center, Governor Keithmar watched in horror as his tactical displays showed a nightmare unfolding. One by one, the lights that represented his colonies simply blinked out of existence. Millions of his people, gone in an instant, and there was nothing he could do. "Where is our defense fleet?" he screamed. "They're en route, Governor," his aide stammered. "But the Vorkath are moving too fast. They'll be gone long before our ships can intercept." "How could this happen? We should have had some warning." "The early warning system, sir." The aide's voice dropped to a terrified whisper. "It was tied into the human patrol network, the one we don't have anymore." A wave of cold dread washed over Keithmar, so thick he could barely draw a breath. The humans. This was all because of the humans. For 8 straight months, the Council had been telling itself a comfortable lie, pretending that everything was just fine. They assured the public that humanity was never that critical. Every new crisis was dismissed as a minor adjustment period they could handle. They genuinely believed the galaxy had no need for one small species from a forgotten corner of space. They couldn't have been more wrong. By the time the Council Defense Fleet finally warped into the Larathi system, they were 18 hours too late. The Vorkath were long gone, having taken millions of Larathi as slaves and leaving behind the smoldering ruins of cities that had stood for 1,000 years. It was the most devastating attack in the history of the galaxy, and it was only the beginning. In the weeks that followed, the Vorkath grew bolder, raiding the Kathvari trade routes. They attacked Draxi mining colonies. They hit targets deep within territory that had been considered perfectly safe for generations. The Council scrambled its fleets to fight back, but something was fundamentally broken. Their ships couldn't communicate effectively. Orders were getting garbled. Entire battle groups were being dispatched to the wrong star systems. The most powerful military in the galaxy, the one that had maintained peace for a millennium, was suddenly tripping over its own feet. And Admiral Than knew exactly why. She had spent months locked away, poring over old archives and piecing together a truth that nobody wanted to face. Humanity wasn't just another member of our fleet, she revealed during a frantic emergency session. They were our entire nervous system. For decades, their communications officers served on our capital ships. We thought they were just there to learn. We were wrong. They were the ones making everything run. They developed the software that allowed a Draxi vessel to communicate with a Kathvari battlecruiser. They settled disagreements between commanders from completely different military cultures. They were the invisible thread that held our entire defense network together. That's ridiculous, Minister Selton scoffed. Our fleet is the greatest in history. We hardly need a group of primitives to keep it running. Then you explain it, Admiral Than challenged. Explain why we have lost every single battle since they left. Explain why our fleet's response time has doubled. Explain why 3 of our own flagships fired on each other last week because of a simple communications error. Selton was speechless. They all were. But the military collapse wasn't even the worst of it. The truly chilling reports were coming from the border. The Dreth hegemony was mobilizing. The Dreth were an ancient, ruthless empire, far older than the Council itself, and they had been a persistent threat for thousands of years. But for the last 100 years, they had been strangely quiet, keeping to their side of the border as if something was scaring them. Now, whatever had been keeping them in check was gone. Intelligence Director Voss addressed the Council, his face ashen. The Dreth are amassing enormous fleets all along our border. Our experts believe they are getting ready for a full-scale invasion. When? Selton demanded. We aren't sure, but it will be soon. It seems like they're waiting for something. Waiting for what? Voss took a long, shaky breath. We believe they're waiting for one final confirmation, that the humans aren't coming back to stop them. The room fell into a dead silence. Selton's scales turned a sickly pale gray. Why on earth would the Dreth care about humanity? He whispered. They're a minor race. Everybody knows that. Everybody thought that, Voss corrected him, his tone grim. But I've been going through classified intelligence files from the past century, and the story they tell is very different. He projected a hologram, filling the chamber with top-secret records that had been buried for generations, records that completely changed the history they all thought they knew. 17 years ago, the Dreth assembled an invasion force of 2,000 warships. They were about to launch an attack on the Council's core worlds, but the invasion never happened. I recall that, Selton said. Our diplomats secured a brilliant treaty. No, Voss stated, his voice flat and cold. The Dreth High Command received a single private transmission from the planet Earth. To this day, we still don't know its contents. But this is what we do know. Within 24 hours of getting that message, the entire Dreth Armada turned around and went back home. The invasion was canceled. And for 17 years, the Dreth haven't made a single aggressive move against us. Until now. Until humanity was gone, Ambassador The Exelar finished, his voice filled with dread. The Dreth were never afraid of the Council. They were afraid of the humans. They're just making sure the watchdog is really gone before they decide to jump the fence. For 3 days, the council members yelled at each other, arguing over pointless strategies and hopeless alliances. But it was all just for show. There was only one real option left, and every single one of them knew it. They had to go and beg the humans to come back. Ambassador Thiexiler was given the humiliating task. He had always been one of the few who had pushed for treating humanity fairly, so they thought he stood the best chance. He flew to Earth with a massive delegation. They came bearing formal apologies, promises of radical change, and offers of a full, equal partnership on the council. Ambassador Elena Vasquez greeted them in Geneva, in the exact same chamber where humanity had first welcomed the council to their world nearly a century before. She was not the same woman Thiexiler remembered. She looked weary, but underneath it was a new core of solid steel, the look of a person who has made an impossible decision and is finally at peace with it. Ambassador Thiexiler, she acknowledged with a slight nod. It's good of you to come. And you, Ambassador Vasquez, he answered. I only regret that we didn't stand with you when it mattered most. So do I, she replied, her voice completely empty of pity. They took their seats across from each other at a simple wooden table, with the entire fate of the galaxy hanging in the balance between them. Imagine being offered the world, only to turn it down flat. That's exactly what happened in a quiet room between two diplomats, with the fate of the entire galaxy hanging in the balance. You know why I'm here, the alien ambassador Thiexiler said, his voice thick with desperation. When he offered humanity a permanent seat on the High Council, full military protection, and a founding role in a new galactic union, he thought it was a done deal. But the human ambassador, Elena, just let the silence hang in the air before finally saying, "That's an incredibly generous offer, but I'm afraid the answer is no." The ambassador was floored. "You can't," he stammered. "The Dreth are coming. The Vorkath are ripping us apart. The council is about to collapse." And all Elena said was, "I know." If you want to know how humanity got the last laugh, you need to hear the rest of this story. "Then why?" he begged, his voice cracking. Elena got up and walked over to a huge window overlooking Earth. Below, you could see kids laughing in a park and hear birds singing in ancient trees under a perfect blue sky. "When the Vorkath were slaughtering our people on our own colonies, we came to you," she said, her voice quiet but as sharp as broken glass. "We didn't make demands. We begged you for help. And your council, you laughed. Minister Selin actually said that younger species need to learn to solve their own problems." The ambassador couldn't even look at her. He was so ashamed. He was wrong. We see that now. "Oh, you see it now," she shot back, turning to face him. "You only see it because the fire is finally at your own front door. For 87 years, we were your most loyal allies. We protected you in ways you never saw. We supported you in ways you never thanked us for. All we ever wanted was a little respect." "I know," he said, his many eyes full of regret. "I tried to warn them." "You did," she acknowledged softly. "You were one of the good ones, but the council decided we were just beneath them. You took every gift we gave and threw nothing but contempt back in our faces." "What can we do to fix this?" he pleaded. Elena sat back down, her voice now as soft and strong as steel. "Nothing. There's nothing you can do. We aren't angry, Ambassador. This isn't about revenge. We don't need your validation anymore. We don't need you to tell us we're worthy. We wasted 87 years hoping you'd finally see our value. We're done hoping." The ambassador was getting desperate. "So you'll just let the galaxy burn? Billions will die." Elena gave him a small, sad smile. "I never said that. When the real threat arrives, humanity will act, but we'll do it our way, not as your servants. We will help because it's the right thing to do, not because you finally decided we're good enough." He leaned in, grasping for any sliver of hope. "What are you planning?" "You'll see," she said. "Very soon. For now, tell your council to prepare for the Dreth, and do what you can for your people." They thought humanity was a weak backwater species. They were about to learn a lesson they would never forget. What do you do when all hope is gone? The human ambassador had left Thexalar with one cryptic message: look to the stars. When he returned to the council and told Minister Celine that humanity had refused their offer, the minister exploded. She said no to everything? Celine's scales were practically rattling with fury. Those arrogant apes, they'd rather watch the galaxy burn than swallow their pride. But Thexalar quietly corrected him. She said they would act when the real crisis arrived, and she told me to look to the stars. Celine scoffed, calling it meaningless poetry. But Thexalar had seen something in Elena's eyes. It wasn't anger or revenge. It was something closer to pity, as if she felt sorry for them. 4 months later, the Dreth came. A black tide of 10,000 warships poured over the border, an engine of pure destruction. Their ships were ancient and terrifying, built by a species that had known nothing but war for 50,000 years. Every single one of them was bigger than the Council's mightiest battleship, armed with weapons that could crack a planet in half. The Council's defense fleet of 3,000 ships met them near the Charon Nebula. The commanders knew it was a suicide mission, but they had no choice. If the Dreth broke through, the core worlds were finished. Admiral Thesson was in command, and she'd spent 4 agonizing months trying to patch up the communication networks that had fallen apart after the humans left. It wasn't nearly enough. She knew it was hopeless, but she had to try. "All ships, engage," she ordered, her voice like stone. "Make them pay for every inch." For 6 hours, the battle was a storm of fire and light. The Council fleet fought with incredible courage, even taking down over 1,000 Dreth ships. But for every enemy ship they destroyed, they lost 3 of their own. The communication problems became a complete nightmare. Without the humans' network, ships fell out of formation, critical orders vanished into static, and friendly fire incidents started breaking out in the chaos. When the last explosion faded, the Council fleet was annihilated. Fewer than 500 ships made it out. From her shattered bridge, Admiral Thesson watched the Dreth Armada advance, unstoppable. "Signal the Council," she whispered. "Tell them we failed. Tell them to begin evacuating the core worlds." Her comms officer was sobbing as she relayed the final, heartbreaking message. Back in the Grand Assembly Hall, pure chaos erupted. Delegates screamed at one another. Some yelled for surrender, others for a pointless last stand. Minister Celine tried to restore order, but his voice was drowned out by the sounds of raw terror. "We're doomed," cried the Draxi ambassador. "The Dreth will enslave us all." Then a voice whispered, "What about the humans?" Another delegate spat back, "The humans? They hate us. They'll probably just make popcorn and enjoy the show." Amidst the panic, Ambassador Thexalar floated silently in his sphere, remembering Elena's last words. "When everything seems lost, look to the stars." And so he looked. The first reports started coming in from the few border outposts still online. Strange ships were appearing. At first, just a few hundred, then thousands. All of them were emerging from the direction of human space. "Are they our reinforcements?" someone asked, a tiny spark of hope in their voice. "No," the officer replied, her voice filled with absolute awe. "Their energy readings don't match anything in our database. They're bigger than anything we've ever seen." The giant hologram in the middle of the hall flickered to life, showing the approaching fleet. A shocked silence fell over the entire room. These ships weren't just big, they were colossal. The smallest one dwarfed the Council's flagship. The largest was the size of a small moon. They moved in flawless, silent formation, thousands of ships gliding through the void as a single entity. Their hulls were made of a strange, shimmering metal, bristling with terrifying weapons, and emblazoned on the side of every single ship was one simple, unmistakable symbol: the blue and green marble of planet Earth. "That's impossible," Minister Celine whispered, his body trembling. "That is completely and utterly impossible." A priority communication request lit up every screen in the hall. It was Ambassador Thexalar who answered. A hologram of Elena Vasquez materialized in the center of the room. She was no longer in her diplomat's robes, but in the crisp uniform of a fleet admiral. Her face was calm, maybe even a little sad. "This is Admiral Elena Vasquez of the United Earth Fleet," she announced, her voice ringing with authority. "We are aware of the Dreth invasion. We are here to help." "Help?" Celine squeaked, his voice barely audible. "What is this? Where did this fleet come from? You told us you were weak, that you couldn't even defend your own colonies." Elena looked at him with that same pity from months ago. "We told you nothing, Minister. You told yourselves. You saw our little patrol ships and assumed that was our best. You saw our farmers and merchants and decided that was all we were. We never lied. For 87 years, we simply let you see what you wanted to see." Celine was completely speechless. "You hid this power for 87 years?" "We did. But why?" Elena took a deep breath and her voice was filled with an old, deep sorrow. "Because we hoped we would never have to use it. We wanted you to see us as friends, but we were scared. Scared that if you saw what we were truly capable of, you'd see a threat, not an ally. For decades, we tried to earn your trust the old-fashioned way, through kindness, through loyalty, through being the best partners we knew how to be. We hoped you'd judge us by the content of our character, not the size of our fleet." She scanned the stunned faces in the assembly. 100 alien species who had spent nearly a century treating humanity like a cosmic joke. "We were wrong," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "You never saw who we were. You only saw what you thought was weakness, and you hated us for it. So now, you'll see our strength. And I can only pray you don't learn to hate us for that too." The hologram shifted, revealing a terrifying reality. A massive enemy armada closing in, with the Council's defensive fleet reduced to smoldering junk. The only thing standing between the invaders and total galactic conquest was humanity. "We will engage the Dreth," Admiral Elena's voice echoed, cold and absolute. "But let's be perfectly clear. We are not asking for permission. We are not making demands. We aren't doing this because you pleaded or because you finally apologized after all these years of disrespect. We're doing this because millions of innocent lives are about to be extinguished while we have the power to stop it." She paused, letting her words sink in across 1,000 worlds. "We're doing this because it's the right thing to do." Then the screen went black. The human fleet met the Dreth Armada in the dead silence of deep space. On paper, it was a joke. 10,000 Dreth battleships versus a mere 8,000 human cruisers. The Dreth commanders were laughing. They'd just annihilated the Council's navy. They expected these upstarts to be a footnote. They were dead wrong. The battle was over in 4 hours, but in that short time, the future of the galaxy changed forever. Human weapons tore through Dreth energy shields as if they weren't there. Their ships moved with a fluid, terrifying coordination that made the Council's greatest war heroes look like amateurs. Every time the Dreth adapted, the humans were already 3 steps ahead, waiting. When Dreth reinforcements arrived, a human welcoming party was already there to greet them. And it wasn't a friendly welcome. From the shattered bridge of her flagship, Admiral Thesson could only watch in utter horror as the Dreth war machine was systematically dismantled. She was a veteran of dozens of conflicts, but she had never, in all her years, witnessed a slaughter carried out with such clean, terrifying precision. "They're not just beating them," her tactical officer whispered, his voice trembling with awe and fear. "They're performing surgery. They're taking apart an entire military while somehow keeping casualties on both sides to a minimum." He was right. The humans weren't just winning. They were doing it with an almost unbelievable level of restraint. They disabled ships when they could, rather than destroying them. They targeted engines and weapon arrays with surgical accuracy, leaving life support systems intact. Every single time a Dreth captain broadcast a surrender, it was instantly accepted, and human ships would even move to protect the new prisoners from friendly fire. They were fighting a war with compassion. When the last shot was fired, a single transmission came from the Dreth High Admiral. His voice was utterly broken. We surrender. We surrender to the humans. We will leave council space immediately. We will accept any terms. Just, for the love of the stars, make it stop. Elena's voice cut through the static, calm and unwavering. Your surrender is accepted. Return to your own territory. Free every prisoner you've ever taken from every species in every war. Decommission your entire offensive military. And you will never again threaten the people of this galaxy, whether they are part of the council or not. Yes, agreed. We agree to everything. Then go home, Elena said, her tone softening almost imperceptibly. Rebuild a society based on peace, not war. We don't hate you. We take no pleasure in this. The war is over. And with that, the Dreth turned and ran. The fearsome armada that had brought the galaxy to its knees limped back home, a shattered wreck. They would never be a threat again. Back in the Grand Assembly Hall, you could hear a pin drop. The representatives stared at the live feeds, watching the aftermath. They saw the human fleet, impossibly powerful, terrifyingly efficient, and unbelievably merciful. Finally, Ambassador Thexelar found his voice. They saved us, he breathed, his tone full of shock. After everything we did to them, they saved us. They had to, Celine snapped, though his voice was hollow. It's their galaxy, too. What other choice was there? They could have chosen anything, Thexelar shot back, turning to face the minister directly. They could have let the Dreth wipe us out. They could have conquered the ashes for themselves. They could have made us their servants, just like we treated them for 87 long years. But they chose mercy. And that one simple act left Sultan without a single word to say. Light years away, Admiral Elena Vasquez watched the starfield from her command bridge. The battle was won, the galaxy was safe, and humanity had just made its grand entrance onto the galactic stage. Admiral Chen Wei came to stand beside her. The Council will be calling any minute now, he said. They're going to offer us the world, leadership of the Joint Fleet, a seat at the head of the table, anything we ask for. I know, she replied quietly. So, what do we tell them? Elena let the silence hang in the air. She thought of her long career, of the constant insults and condescension, and of the day she finally laid her ambassador's badge on the podium and walked away. She thought about the person she wanted to be and the civilization she hoped humanity could become. We're going to tell them the truth, she finally said. We don't want to rule them. We never have. All we ever wanted was to be partners, to be equals, and now we have the chance to build something new, something better, not because they're finally ready to respect us, but because it's the right thing to do. She turned from the view screen and walked toward the comm station. A galaxy needed to be healed. We showed them our strength, she said over her shoulder. Now it's time to show them something far more important. And what's that? Chen asked. We're going to show them our humanity. In the days that followed, a profound quiet settled over the galaxy. Rescue ships navigated the debris fields of the largest war in known history, pulling survivors from the wreckage of both fleets. Human medics treated wounded Dreth soldiers right alongside the Council's own. No one was turned away. No one was left behind. On the Dreth homeworld, a society built on 50,000 years of conquest began to crumble. Their navy was gone. Their empire was in ruins. They braced for retribution, for occupation, for slavery. They expected the humans to do to them exactly what they would have done in their place. What they got instead was aid. Human cargo ships arrived, filled with food and medical supplies. Human engineers offered to help rebuild their shattered infrastructure. Human diplomats brought peace terms that were strict, but incredibly just. They demanded disarmament and reform, not shame and subjugation. The Dreth High Chancellor met Admiral Vasquez on his ruined world. He was an old, tired man who had spent his life fighting a war he had now lost in the most humiliating way possible. I don't understand, he admitted. We tried to annihilate your allies. We would have destroyed everything you cared about. Why are you showing us this mercy? Elena looked at the old warrior and saw the fear, the confusion, and the tiny spark of hope that this wasn't some kind of elaborate trap. "Because mercy isn't a weakness," she said gently. "It's the hardest strength to master. Any fool can break things. It takes real courage to build a peace with someone who tried to destroy you. Your people could be emperors right now. Nothing could stop you. We don't want to be emperors. That was never the goal." "Then what do you want?" A small smile touched Elena's lips. "The same thing we've wanted since the first time we looked up at the night sky, and we want friends, we want partners, we want to explore and learn and build alongside other people. We want to be able to offer a hand when someone falls and ask for one when we stumble. That's it. That's the whole grand plan." The Dreth High Chancellor bowed his head, and for the first time in 50,000 years, a leader of the Dreth Empire began to cry. "We will try," he vowed. "We will try to become the people you believe we can be. We may fail, but because of you, we will finally have the chance to try." Rebuilding the Dreth would take a long, long time. It would be a long, slow, and often painful journey. But it would happen. A civilization once defined by war would learn to define itself by something else entirely. Humanity had proven it was possible. Inside the Grand Assembly Hall, the council met to figure out what to do next. The atmosphere in the room was more somber than it had ever been. The very same leaders who had once openly mocked humanity now sat in a state of humbled shock. Minister Celine was the first to rise and speak. His scales seemed to have lost their shine since the battle, and he moved as if he were carrying the weight of all his past mistakes. "I stand before you today to finally admit a truth we have ignored for 87 years. Humanity was never the lesser species we made them out to be. They were guardians, choosing to hide their true strength. They were servants who chose to help others." Imagine getting kicked out of the cool kids club of the galaxy. That's exactly what happened to us. They called humanity too weak, too emotional, and for 87 years they laughed at us. So when a terrifying alien armada showed up to burn their shiny empires to the ground, the very people who mocked us were suddenly begging for a hero. They were on the brink of being totally wiped out, but they weren't. Want to know how the underdogs nobody believed in ended up saving everyone? Stick around, because the answer will surprise you. For decades, we'd asked for nothing more than a seat at the table, to be judged by our character, not by the size of our fleet. They took our kindness for weakness. We'd send them warnings about galactic threats, and they'd file them under hysterical human nonsense. We tried to build bridges, and they built walls. All we ever wanted was to be treated with basic dignity, but our pleas were met with condescending silence. Then, the Dreth arrived. They were a nightmare clad in iron, a warrior race that lived for conquest, and they tore through the Council's defenses like paper. The galaxy's most powerful empires, the ones who had called us pathetic, were suddenly losing. Their unbeatable fleets were shattered, their worlds were burning, and their arrogance had turned to pure primal fear. It was a war they started with their pride, and it was a war they were about to lose completely. Just when their final capital world was about to fall, something incredible happened. A fleet of human ships blinked into existence between the Dreth and the planet. We didn't come with guns blazing for revenge. Instead, we did something they'd never seen before. We protected them. Our ships moved with a strange grace, defending the defenseless, shielding civilian transports, and outsmarting the Dreth with tactics they couldn't predict. It was a small surprise that turned into a giant turning point. After we pushed the Dreth back, the Galactic Council called an emergency session. Broadcast across the entire galaxy, the lead minister, a being who once personally mocked our ambassador, stood before a hologram of our admiral, Elena Vasquez. He admitted they were wrong, that they had failed us, and that our mercy had shown them the error of their ways. And then came the big offer. On behalf of the Galactic Council, he announced, we formally offer humanity leadership of the Council itself. Please, take your rightful place as our leader. The entire galaxy held its breath. This was it, the ultimate victory, the ultimate revenge. The weaklings were now being offered the crown. Elena Vasquez was silent for a long moment, and then with the entire universe watching, she gave a one-word answer. No. A shockwave of confusion rippled through the chamber. The minister stammered, "No, I don't understand." This was the big reveal, the moment no one saw coming. "Humanity will not rule you," Elena said, her voice calm but firm. "We didn't save you to become your new masters. We saved you because it was the right thing to do. Your problem isn't your leader, it's your system. For 10,000 years, you've built a ladder where everyone tries to claw their way to the top. That's what created this war. I'm not asking for the top spot on your ladder. I'm asking you to kick the ladder over and build a round table instead." She proposed something radical, a true federation, a partnership where every species gets an equal vote no matter how big or small, where you help each other because you're friends, not because of a contract. The idea was so revolutionary it was almost unthinkable. But then the lead minister did something even more shocking. He stepped down from his towering platform, walked across the floor, and in front of the entire galaxy, he bowed his head to the hologram of the human admiral. "I was wrong about humanity," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I will spend the rest of my days trying to earn your forgiveness." Elena offered a kind smile. "Forgiveness isn't something you earn," she replied. "It's a gift, and I'm giving it to you now. Let's build a better future, together." One by one, the other representatives came down from their high seats and stood together on the floor, equals for the first time in millennia. In that moment, the Galactic Federation was born. Years later, in a sun-drenched garden on Earth, an old woman named Elena Vasquez watched her grandchildren play. A news report was talking about Remembrance Day, the holiday marking the war that almost ended everything. Her grandson tugged on her sleeve. "Grandma," he asked, "why did you help them? After they were so mean to you?" Elena pulled the boy into a hug. "Because who we are is a choice we make every day," she said gently. "They chose to be arrogant. We chose to be helpers. Being angry is like holding a hot coal. You're the only one who gets burned. But forgiveness is like a warm fire that makes everyone feel better. And I decided a long time ago," she whispered, looking up at the sky full of starships flying in peace, "that I'd rather be warm